All right. Well, it's 12:30 Pacific time here, so we'll go ahead and get started. Um, Thank you all very much for joining us today. We're going to be taking about an hour of your time to go through some topics in Essential Physics, more specifically, how to get started with the Essential Physics third edition textbook and curriculum. Um, Let me introduce myself. My name is JJ Plank. I'm a curriculum and training specialist here at Pasco Scientific. I was also one of the contributing authors to the textbook, and I'm joined today by Melissa. Melissa, you want to go ahead and...
Hello, everybody. I am Melissa Pitlack, and I am a teacher support representative, and I do a lot of the support for the curriculum products, so I am here to help out today.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. So a little bit of housekeeping notes before we get started. Everybody's audio line is currently muted. We do this to prevent feedback and any extra noise that might interrupt the presentation. But I want to make sure that this doesn't totally inhibit your ability to ask questions. So please, throughout the presentation, feel free to ask questions at any time. And the best way to do that is to use the built-in chat window that's part of the GoToTraining interface. So we're using GoToTraining to deliver this presentation, and the little toolbar like you see on my screen here includes a section titled Chat. And in there, you go ahead and type any question you want. Melissa or I will address the question. Melissa is here to help address those questions while I'm talking. And during the presentation, I'm going to have her, if it's a that should be addressed to the entire group, stop me and we'll address that question here. But you can also send your questions through that chat. Everybody in the entire presentation that's joining us, or just Melissa and I as presenters, or just another attendee if you like, and you do that using that to drop-down menu there. Let me see if I can highlight that for us. This to drop-down menu in that control panel. Okay, and another thing, in that toolbar on the left-hand side are 4 small buttons, the top of which is important, that orange arrow that points to the right. That arrow can be used to that toolbar. So during the presentation, it might be in the way. Click that orange arrow, it'll collapse it, and it'll move it off to, want to bring it back, you can just click the orange arrow again, and it will re-expand that for you. And you can also separate the different sections of the toolbar if you want. So if you want to collapse it but pull the chat window out, you can click where it says the word chat, drag it out, then click the orange arrow and it'll collapse everything that's left for you. Another bit of housekeeping, we are currently recording the session. At the end of this, we'll publish that and hopefully sometime tomorrow have a link ready to send out via email. So everybody that joined us, special thanks to you for joining us during the session, but everyone that also registered is going to receive this email with the link to the recording, and you can access that at any time. So what we're going to cover today spans only a small amount. Well, I'm going to try my best to, in the hour, cover as much as we can regarding the textbook and the entire curriculum set. But there's a lot to cover. We may not get to all of it. The 6 major bullet points that I wanted to cover are, what's in the book, what are some of the features of the book, specifically student versus the teacher book. There's a print copy of the book as well as an e-version, electronic version, and there's only an electronic version for the teacher. So I want to cover some of the differences and specifics of the two. Also, I want to, part of the curriculum offering includes an entire top to bottom set of lessons, and I want to go over what's in the lesson, or excuse me, what's in a lesson, and then touch on several specific ones as examples. And then we'll talk about lab investigations in the book, some of the nuances of those investigations. And then at the end, if we'll have time, I'd like to cover in as much detail as we can in the time we have left, the test bank. So we have an assessment generator or an engine to generate tests. I'll introduce that and we'll cover some of the bits and pieces in there on how to create and save tests for your classes. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started. Well, what's in the book? The Essential Physics 3rd edition textbook, the printed book, as well as the ebook, is broken down into 8 units. Anything from, what is science, what is physics, all the way down to Unit 8, which includes things and topics in modern physics. We've got thermodynamics, waves, electricity, magnetism, light and optics, energy, motion, force. It's all in there. And then within each of those units are 27 chapters that are divided like you see here on my screen. Again, we've got everything from force and motion all the way down to Unit 8, where we talk about things like quantum and nuclear. Now, I mentioned briefly, the book has 2 incarnations. One is a printed textbook like you see here on the left. It's just your standard hard copy textbook. But there's also an electronic version of the book that's available. And what's beautiful about this is that the pages between the 2 are identical. So the printed textbook and the ebook, if you're on page 531 of either of them, they look exactly the same. There may be some small differences in the ebook version because there's some electronic tools that aren't available, obviously, in the printed book. But for the most part, the pages are identical. So if you have students that are using a blend of both the electronic textbook and the printed textbook, they'll find seamlessly that they can switch between the 2. And again, there are some small nuances, but I'll go over those as we go through the pages of the ebook in just a second. So again, we're in an electronic environment. I'm going to do my best to point out any of the differences, but mostly we're going to focus on the electronic textbooks as we go through the. So I want to get you guys involved, and to do that, you're going to have to get your hands on the electronic textbook. And so what I've done here is I provided for you a trial version of the student book. And what you can do if you're following along, and I encourage this, you can go to this URL, student.pasco.com, and type in this trial code here. And so write down the code and save that, and then go to student.pasco.com, punch that information in, and I've actually sent it to everybody in the chat window. So if you just want to copy and paste it, you can do that as well. So if you go over to chat, you may see there's 2 messages from me. One has the code, and then one has the URL for accessing the textbook. So go ahead and click on the URL, and then you can copy and paste the code into the field, the text field, and then we all can access the book at once. And let me do that. I'm going to demonstrate that for you right now. So I've got my browser open here, and I'm going to go to student.pasco.com. Okay, and on this website, it's very bland, and it's meant to be that way on purpose. So this is how students would access the electronic book on the internet. And now there's several ways you can access the electronic book. You can do it via the web, like we're going to do today, or if you wanted to, and you've purchased the electronic book, you can actually move a local copy of that book to your computer and access it there. And it's the exact same way. In fact, the way the pages of the book are rendered, when we look at them, they behave just like web pages. So you'll notice when you access the ebook locally, that you're kind of, the files that you're double clicking to open the book, they look like a Firefox or a Google Chrome or another web browser application file. You'll double click on that and it'll open a web browser just like you see here. You can access the book locally this way. And the different paths to access the book look the same though. So I'm going to punch in this code. It's NG SS58-EP3-SB-1018-JBF8D. And then I'll click login with access code. And there we go. We're in the book. And this is exactly what students would see when they access the ebook. So once the code has been entered, let's pretend I'm on a student computer right now. Once the code's been entered, if you have your browser on your machine set up to remember cookies, that code is saved as a cookie, and then students never have to punch in the code again unless their cookies have been cleared. So if I close this window, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. and I open up another window, whoops, and I go to student.pasco.com, it recognizes that the cookie is already mounted in, and I can access the book right away without having to punch the code in again. And the same thing goes for accessing the book locally if you have an electronic copy of the book saved on your local machine. Okay, so this is the home screen to the ebook. So let's go ahead and talk about the buttons we see here. Starting in the top row from left to right, the standards button, I'm actually going to address that in a little more detail in a minute. So we'll go ahead and skip that one. The contents button here allows us a linked method of accessing the chapters in the table of contents of the book. And you'll see here are the 27 chapters broken down into 8 units that I mentioned earlier. And I'm going to go back to the home screen. And to do that, I'm just going to use this home button. And I'll talk more about this navigation bar in just a second. But if I ever want to get back to this screen that we're looking at here, just click the little button that looks like a picture of a house and it'll take you to the home screen. The jump button just does just that. It lets us jump to a specific page. So if I know what page I want to go to, I can type that page in right here and jump straight to that page. The help button here has a couple of helpful things for students. Most importantly, there's 3 videos here to getting started. Excuse me, there are links to 3 getting started videos, quick guides to navigating the ebook, using SparkView software. Integrated in this curriculum offering are lab activities. And some of those lab activities use SparkView software. If students aren't familiar with how to use the software, they can use this intro video to help introduce themselves to it. Or if you'd like to, you can provide the same video for them. And then also a link to Pasco's How Do I YouTube channel. So our How Do I YouTube channel has hundreds of videos that address all kinds of different hardware and also lab topics. I encourage you to go there and check it out. All right, and so just like I clicked the home button, another useful tool to get me to where I want to go when navigating the ebook, I can also use the browser navigation tools. Just like I said earlier, the book is rendered as a web page. So if I want to go back to the page I was just looking at, I can just click the back button in my browser window and it'll take me there, as well as if I wanted to click forward to get there. Coming soon here, there's a switch books button. These are for schools that have both the Essential Physics textbook as well as the Essential Chemistry textbook. If those computers are using both of those textbooks, you'll notice when I went to the student.pasco.com website, it automatically brought me to the home screen of the Essential Physics textbook. Well, that's not going to help the chemistry teacher. So if that ever happens, the chemistry teacher will be able to click this switch books button and then switch straight over to Essential Chemistry without having to do anything else. Okay, starting in that bottom row left to right, the investigations button here, when I click on that, it lists a link to all of the investigations or the lab activities in the textbook. You'll see here they're numbered starting from chapter 1 to chapter 27. And if I want to jump straight to any of these, I can do that by just clicking on the link here. And now I want to note, make specific note that these are all of the lab activities in the textbook. So when I'm on the home screen and I click this investigations button, it shows me all of the labs in the entire textbook. Okay, moving over to videos. Right, this is the same idea as the investigations button. All of the 85 full production videos and short animations that are in the textbook. If you ever want to reference one quickly, you can go straight to the home screen and click on it this way. Same thing with homework problems and problem sets. These list all of the section review and chapter reviews in each of the 27 chapters. So within each chapter, there can be anywhere from 2 to 4 sections. Each problem set, as well as a full chapter review problem set that you can access quickly this way. Interactives. This interactives button takes me to the 50 interactive simulations and 70 interactive equations throughout the entire textbook, broken down by chapter. And then these 4 buttons on the end, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, these STEM buttons are designed to quickly jump to specific applications involving specific science concepts, technology, engineering, and math. You know, I find the math, jumping to some of these math topics very helpful if I want to introduce topics in algebra, topics involving the quadratic equation and things like that. I can jump straight to those without having to skip through the pages of the science content to get to those math specific pages. Okay, so that's a look at the student ebook home screen. And again, I'm going to point out, make sure we know that we're in the student book, and we'll take a look at the teacher book in just a minute. There are some differences, but the home screen that we're looking at right now is for the student book. Okay, so for those of you following along, let's go ahead and do this. We'll click on the contents button. That brings up the table of contents here. And what I want to do is I want to click on the Chapter 4 acceleration link here. And what that does is takes us straight to the beginning of Chapter 4. And now that we're here, I'm going to take some time and talk about the navigations that we see here. So before we were looking at the home screen and the buttons that were on the home screen. Now we're actually on a textbook page. So if we went to page 106 in the printed text, this page that we're looking at right here would look identical to that printed textbook page. So we're on a textbook page. The buttons at the top here might look identical to the ones that were on the home screen, but the big difference is the buttons on the home screen displayed all of those elements throughout the entire textbook. Now that I'm on a textbook page, when I click these buttons, it shows me those same elements, but only in that chapter that we're in. Since we're in Chapter 4, when I click the investigations button, I see the investigations that are in Chapter 4. I click the video button, I see the videos that are in Chapter 4, the interactives in Chapter 4, and so on for all of those buttons, as well as the STEM buttons at the end. So jumping over to the left, there's the home button that we talked about earlier, and then a new button, this chapter button that we see here. It's got a 4 in it. If I click that button, this is sort of a quick access to the TOC by chapter. And also it'll break down the chapter that you're in. So if we wanted to jump to a specific section in this chapter, so we're in Chapter 4, but we're at the beginning of it. If we wanted to jump to section 4.1, 4.2, 4.3, we can click on the link here and do that. And then the last button that we didn't see also on the home screen is this search button. And what we can do is we can use this search button to look up keywords in the textbook and then click these links to jump to those pages with the highlighted with the content of interest highlighted like you see here in that orange box, orangish yellow. Again, the back button, love the back button. Just in case I end up on a page I don't want to, I just use the back button to go back. Okay. So this is the beginning of just about every chapter. You've got this introductory page into the chapter, and then immediately following that is a chapter study guide. And on this chapter study guide page in every chapter is a short summary of the chapter, 1, 2, sometimes 3 paragraphs describing the content of the chapter. A list of, a list of the learning objectives bulleted here. A list of the investigations, the lab investigations in that chapter. And then over here, the chapter index are links to the pages within that chapter. And some of them are purple here because I've been clicking on them. Below that, we've got our important equations or important relationships throughout this chapter, as well as vocabulary listed down there. Again, this page looks identical to the printed textbook page. Okay, moving forward, I use this right arrow button here to go to the next page. If I wanted to go back to the page I was just on, I can use the left arrow. Also, I want to point that these buttons live down here at the bottom of the page too, left and right arrows down here. And also you can use the keyboard, the arrows on your keyboard to move forward and backward or left and right in the page, through the pages in the textbook. So if I hit the left arrow, I go back a page. If I hit the right arrow, I go forward a page. Melissa, are there any questions? Oh, perfect. All right. So we're on page 108 here. Let's talk about what you find on the pages in the textbook. Okay, one unique feature of this textbook is all of our pages have one topic. So we were very diligent in building the textbook in such a way that what's listed at the top of the page as a topic doesn't bleed from this page into the next. So students don't have to go searching through the book to find certain topics. Also, you'll find here that each paragraph has a topic as well. So students don't have to go combing through that page to find specific information. Like, what's the definition of acceleration? You can find it right here. Digging a little bit deeper in these paragraphs, you'll see here that there's a little speaker button. Now, it's important to note that this little speaker button, you'll only see it in the student version of this book. So if you're looking in the teacher version of the book, which we'll see in just a second, and you're wondering, where's the little speaker button? It only lives in the student version of this book. And what this does is it reads the paragraph content aloud. So if I click on this,
almost nothing moves at constant speed for very long in everyday life.
You'll see here that the paragraph content is read aloud, and all of these paragraphs have that feature on it, including questions, solved problems, and other pieces of content in the book. Now you'll see here the word acceleration is bolded in blue, and if I hover my cursor over it, a definition pops up. I'll click here and that leaves this definition up. So vocabulary words, they were also listed on that that chapter summary page, are shown bolded in the paragraph content, and in there you can find the definition for those vocab words as well as have them read aloud.
Acceleration, rate of change in velocity, or the change in velocity.
In English or in Spanish.
Aceleración, rapidez del cambio en la velocidad.
I can just click on that and it'll go away. Also on this page and other pages of the textbook, you'll find interactive equations. So all of the equations, the fundamental equations that are part of the textbook content, have a blue box around it like what we see here. And some of them have most of them I should say, have a interactive equation or an interactive calculator that comes with it. In this instance, we have an equation here on the left side of our screen. Let me get a highlighter here. So we have an equation on the left side of our screen that we can manipulate in those boxes that are filled in with white. We can change the values, the numbers in there, as well as the values over here, and they're interconnected. Meaning if I change one, it will change in the other as well. So if I make my delta V 15 instead of 5, I'll hit the equal sign. You'll see here it changed in this box as well. And clicking the equal sign here in this interactive calculator actually solves the equation for me. So whatever's dark gray, in this case it's acceleration, that's the value that's being solved for, but we can change that. We can make change in velocity of the value that we're solving for instead. So I'm gonna set this back to 15. And then also, many of these interactive calculators have the ability to run a short demonstration. So if I click this run button, you'll see here that the cart demonstrates the acceleration, that 3 meters per second squared. And I can change any of these boxes filled in with white here, the final time, the initial time, and the initial and final velocity values. If you're using a touch environment or you're using an interactive whiteboard, there's a keyboard that's built into the interactive right here that I can use to clear and type in values if I'd like. Also, another feature of these interactive calculators are these ABCD sample problems. Students can use these as practice or they can be assigned. In any case, they can cycle through. Sometimes there's 2 and there's as many as I think I've seen 6 before. And they can use the interactive calculator to help solve these questions. Okay, another feature of the textbook that you'll find on normal textbook pages. Let me rephrase that. I'm sorry, excuse me. On this page, you'll see here that there's a button next to that speaker button. It says more, and if I click that, a small paragraph expands with some additional information that students might find useful as related to the context of this page. These more buttons are exclusive to the ebook. So this doesn't exist. This blue paragraph here does not exist in the printed textbook. So this is one of the subtle differences between the printed textbook and the ebook. Another subtle difference are these boxes down here with a gray background. Test your knowledge. So students can, at the bottom of many or most pages in this ebook, go down here and test their knowledge regarding the the content of this page. A short answer is provided here for the students if they'd like. Just click the show solution button. We can hide that if we want. Okay, so for those of you following along, I'm going to use this jump function in the navigation bar at the top. So in that jump window, go ahead and type in page 112. And when I hit enter, we can jump from page 108 to 112 here. And I'm going to point out a couple other features of the textbook and ebook. So part of the textbook here, we have calculating acceleration and calculating speed. These are solved problems. Okay, so throughout the book, the content is, throughout the book, you'll find these solved problems as they relate to the content of the page that you're on, as well as previous pages. These problems are worked out using this method where we've got ask, given, relationship, and solution. Okay, and these are small, these problems were short. There are longer ones that consume more of a page, but throughout the textbook, you'll find, in the ebook, you'll find these solved problems. And then unique to the electronic book or this ebook here, we've got short animations. And I showed you a link from the homepage that could take us to the different videos and animations throughout the book. This is an example of some of those short animations that can be used to help convey topics. And you'll see here, if I hover my cursor over it, it plays the animation automatically. And when I move it off, it stops and it restarts. Okay, so again, for those of you following along, go to the navigation toolbar in the jump button and let's type in page 1. Actually, you know what? Let's just use that right arrow and just go to the next page. So now we're on page 113 of the ebook. And what we see here, and this is identical to the printed textbook as well. Students would find this on page 113. It's an example of a lab investigation built into the textbook content. And so we're not going to get into too much detail regarding this right now. We'll touch on this in a little bit. But I just want to point out that the lab investigations are built into the textbook content, and they can include labs in a form that uses Pasco hardware. Like you see here, there's a smart cart, and then they'll use SparkView to help collect data. But there's also lab activities that use simulations instead of hardware. And I'll jump to page 180 and you'll see here that this is the lab investigation 6A, chapter 6, vector navigation. And this one uses an interactive simulation that we'll talk about in a little bit more detail in just a second. So there's different flavors of labs that use hardware, labs that use hardware with data collection, and then labs that use simulation with data collection. Or I should say labs that use simulation. The data is within the simulation. We'll talk about that more in just a second. Okay, I'm gonna use my browser back button, go back here to page 113. All right, so we're still in chapter 4 here, and I'm gonna use this jump as you following along. I'm gonna go to page 121. Okay, and what this is it's the very last page of section 1 of chapter 4. And I mentioned it earlier, but the end of every section in the textbook, you'll find a summary, a short summary of the primary content in that section, as well as vocab and key equations, and then a set of review problems to test their progress. Okay, and the solutions to these problems are accessible by clicking that Hide Show Solution button, and you'll see here that some of these problems, they might involve an in-depth solution. The solution might be a little bit deeper than they thought, and so they can use these. The solution content is full, is basically what I'm saying. So students can find all the answers they need right here in those show solution fields. And then also, I should point out before I go on, the show solution content is unique to the ebook. You won't find the solution content in the printed textbook. You'll find the questions, but you won't find the show solution content. Okay, and down here at the very bottom of every section review page, there's an orange button that says take a quiz. Students can click this and it'll take them to an assessment rendered by our textbook engine, or our assessment engine, our test bank engine. And they can use this as a tool to, again, test their progress. But what's unique about this is as students choose the solutions, they can click the score button here and find out just how well they did, right? Well, it didn't do so well on this one. Looks like I only got 2 of them right. And so if I get one wrong, these take a quiz assessments allow students to get a little bit of a hint, Okay, you tried, you got a wrong answer, but you know what? Here's a hint that maybe this is the misconception that you have. Let's address that here and see how well you re-answer the question. So I can score it again. Well, I got that one wrong again. There we go. And every time I click score, every time I click score, it counts my attempts and it gives me my overall score here. And now if I go through these questions and I find them to be really difficult as a student, I can click on this new button here at the top and it scrambles up the questions, gives me some new ones and changes the answers. So I can test my skill even deeper if I needed to. And every time I click new, I get a new sort of mix up of questions. And then if I just can't get it right, then I can click the show solution button and it'll tell me which is the right answer and the solution that goes with it. There's a little bit of text here you'll see explaining the solution. Is there a question?
Yeah, can we turn off show solution?
The question is, can we turn off the show solution button? And the answer is no. The show solution button is built into this. This take a quiz assessment is designed to help students learn, have a natural, to set their own learning progression. So they'll go through here and see what they do. It's not designed to be used as a formal assessment tool, although it could be, but you would have to rely on, your students not to click show solution just to get the answer. But if I click show solution, you'll notice here that these questions have very specific answers. If I click new, not only do the questions change, but if the same question was to come up again, the numbers within the question have changed. So even though it showed me the solution to the same question earlier, the new version of that question has new numbers, so the solution is actually different now. Okay, so if we're in the review problems like we see here, can we turn off the show solution button here? The answer is no. That's built into the electronic textbook. We can't turn that off. Okay. All right, so the last thing I want to show you regarding specific student ebook content are the problems at the end of the chapter. So we saw the section review problems. Now let's take a look at the chapter review problems. So at the end of every chapter is a large set of problems that you can assign as homework. And these ones do not have show solution buttons. So students will use these as homework. You can use them as assessment tools. Students do not have access to the solutions. Only the teacher has access to the solutions to these problems. So the way I got here, I'm in chapter 4, I click on this problems button at the top. It jumps me straight to the beginning of the review problems, the chapter review problems. And you'll see here we've got vocabulary problems, conceptual problems, broken down by section, I might add. So these are the conceptual problems for section 4.1. If I go forward a page, you'll see here we've got conceptual problems for section 4.2. And then now we get into quantitative problems, also broken down by section. Another thing I want to point out here, if you look at questions 23, 24, and 25, you'll see here there's a little chili next to them. The chili indicates the difficulty level of that question. So if you want students to only do easy questions, you can make your assignment only those problems that have 1 or no chilies. Or if you want a more difficult for your honor students, you could use 2 or 3 chilies. And then at the very end of the chapter reviews, more quantitative problems for section 4.1, you'll see here that there is standardized test practice questions. And these are in every chapter. And so these are multiple choice questions. Again, students don't have access to the solutions of these unless you provide it for them in a separate document, but they can't access it through the student ebook. Okay, so that's basically a very quick, very not super wide coverage of the ebook. Again, there's other features, but those are the primary features and functions for students in the student ebook. Now let's go take a look at the teacher ebook. So the code I gave you was for a trial access to the student book. And unfortunately, I can't broadcast a trial code for the teacher book, but the stuff that I'm about to look at in the teacher book, whether it be, when it's on a page in the when it's on a page in the teacher ebook, The page content will be identical to the student ebook, so you can still follow along if you like. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to access the teacher ebook by going to, instead of student.pasco.com, I'll go to teacher.pasco.com. Okay, and then just like the window we saw before where we had to punch in that access code, I would do the same thing but using a teacher code, and it would give me access to what we see here, which is the teacher ebook. This is the home screen for the teacher ebook. Looks very similar. In fact, there's only two things, excuse me, that are different here, and it's these two buttons on the far right of that top row, the My Account and Test Bank button. So the Test Bank button, I'm going to skip over that right now. We'll circle back to that at the very end and talk about how to generate assessments. Let's talk about the My Account button. So as a teacher, you can build an account that has things like access to your student and teacher code information. If you have students that lost their student code, you can populate your student code in your My Account info and then just go in there and grab it and redistribute it to your students if you like. Right now, entire schools that are using the textbook use the same student code. So you buy the code by seat, you buy the license by seat, and the same code is used for every seat. And then the same thing goes for teachers within the same school. The teacher access code is the same. Again, we have a switch books button here that you can use. The same switchability of books is found in the My Account button. Also in the My Account button, you can find things like updates to the content of the textbooks, whether it be Essential Physics or Essential Chemistry. And then you can also access the test bank from within My Account. And you can also access your saved tests from within My Account. Okay, all the way over here on the left in the top row, the standards button, I'm going to click on that. Okay, and we skipped over it earlier, and it's not so useful for the student, but it's very useful for the teacher. And what this is, it's a list of all of the standards, and it should be broken down by state. Now, I'm using a generic NGSS alignment here, but if I was a teacher in, let's say, Louisiana, it would list my Louisiana state standards and the specific page content that addresses those standards. So you'll see here, this standard, our ELA standard 12.7 is addressed on page 558 in paragraph 7. And if I wanted to, I could click, erase that. I could click the link here for view, and it would take me straight to that page content and highlight it for me. So I'm gonna actually find a specific NGSS standard here. And then we'll take a look at that. So I hit the Control F on my keyboard, and what it does, it brings up the find text native to my web browser application I'm using. So I'm using Google Chrome. I hit Control F, and so it's going to search this web page. And remember, I said the ebook is rendered like a web page, so I can search it like a web page. So I hit Control F, and I'm going to go to PS2-3, and there it is right there. And you'll see here, this standard says this is a performance expectation, and it says students have to be able to apply scientific and engineering ideas to design, evaluate, and refine a device that minimizes the force on a macroscopic object during a collision. I've got 4 pieces of textbook content that address that, and if I click on view, it takes me straight to the page, highlights that content in orange, and you'll see here, this is one of our engineering design challenges or lab activities that involves an engineering design challenge where students design a crash barrier, which is intended to minimize the impact in a collision. So the entire list of standards should be here. You can access them, access the specific page content by clicking the view link on the right-hand side of the screen. Again, much more useful for teachers than it is for students, but the same access is available to students. One unique difference, since we're in the teacher book, you'll see here that there are some instances that say TE assess. This means it's a solution to an assessment item found only in the teacher edition of the book. SB stands for student book.
Error 404 page not.
Okay, so it sounds like somebody is accessing the book, and when you click on standards, you get error 404 page not found. I think that depends on how you're accessing the book. So if you're accessing it through teacher.pasco.com, those standards should be there. It could be that those state standards aren't fully loaded yet. I'll have to follow up. We'll have to follow up on that one. Generally speaking, though, from the book, if you click the standards button, depending on which state you've adopted the textbook in, it will have that state standard information. Okay, so all of the buttons are exactly the same. The whole bottom row of buttons here function exactly the same as they did in the student book. The only difference in the top button here that's similar between the student and teacher book is this help button. If I click on help here, one important difference between the help in teacher versus the help in the student ebook is that the teacher ebook has this link to the user guide for the book. And this is important. So if you're ever looking for something, need a question answered right away, or you're wondering what something in the textbook does, you can go into this user guide, and this user guide catalogs, and you can download it, it's a PDF, catalogs all of the features and functions of the textbook that are really important. In fact, most of what we're covering today is also covered in this user guide. Okay. So we've seen the student ebook. Now let's dive into an ebook page in the teacher ebook. So I'm going to do that by going again to contents. And again, we're going to go to chapter 4, acceleration. Okay, and you'll notice a real distinct difference right away. There's this yellow sidebar on the left-hand side of the page content. So we're on a page in the teacher ebook. That yellow sidebar is different because it houses all the teacher resource information for the book. And in this case, since it's the very beginning of the chapter, it has all the lessons that are in this chapter. So chapter 4 has 4 lessons, and we can access any of the 4 by just clicking on it right here. All right, and so if we go to a normal textbook page, you'll see here that the teacher resource content changes. It's specific to that page and that lesson, and I'll talk more about the lesson content in just a second. And then if we jump to the problem sets at the end, the ones where I said students don't have access to the solutions, you'll see here all of the answers to those assessment items are here in that yellow sidebar. And more specifically, if I go forward, you'll see here quantitative problems that require a more in-depth solution, like number 26 here. Not only is the answer in the key over here on the left-hand side of the screen, but there's a worked out solution under the problem here that students don't see. And you'll see this for many questions throughout the textbook, where it's broken down in that method where it has asked, given, relationship, and then the solution. Okay, so I'm gonna step back over here to my PowerPoint and let's talk about what's in a lesson. So in the textbook, and more specifically the ebook, there's 134 lessons distributed amongst the 27 chapters, okay? Inside each lesson, each of the 134 lessons, there is 4 major components. There's a lesson plan, a slide set to help deliver the lesson content, a piece of student work, and that's a student handout that can be one of 2 things, and then a teacher key. Okay, the student work I said can be one of 2 things, and those 2 things are either a lab investigation or a worksheet that students can work on and turn in. Okay, and each of those is presented in one of 2 ways. That's a PDF, a printable PDF document, and an editable Word document. The only thing that you don't have editable, or excuse me, I take that back. All of the forms are editable. The lesson plan is presented in a Word and PDF format. The slide set is presented in a PowerPoint format, which is totally editable. And then the student handouts, whether it be an investigation or worksheet, is also PDF or Word doc, totally editable. And then the teacher key is also PDF or Word doc, which is totally editable. Now there's one thing on here, you see the little camera icon? Our lab investigations come with a video component. So if you're wondering how to do a specific lab investigation throughout the textbook, you can access a video that helps explain some of the features and functions of that lab investigation, maybe even some of the nuances and misconceptions therein. So 134 lessons. Each lesson has 4 major components. And then the student work that's part of that lesson can be one of 2 things, a lab investigation or a worksheet like you see here. And we saw a lab investigation in the ebook. Remember, there were 2 forms of lab investigations. There was one that we saw, one that used the smart cart and a track, and then one that used a simulation, okay? Those pages that we were looking at previously were actual pages in the book. Now, what we're gonna look at here in a second are printouts that come with the teacher ebook that represent the pages in the book that you can actually print and hand to the students, and they can fill in their answers and submit it. So let's go back to the book. Okay, so I'm going to jump back to page 114. And this is the beginning of this lesson. So lesson 3 is models of accelerated motion. And you'll see on the top left of the screen, there are some links at the very top titled lesson resources. These are links to all of those elements that I was just talking about. Okay, we've got lesson plan available in a Word doc and PDF format, a slide presentation available in a PowerPoint and PDF formats, student work or student handouts available in doc and PDF formats, and then also the answer keys, the teacher answer keys in doc and PDF formats. And then here's a link to a video. So let's just pop in here and take a look at these real fast. If I click on the PDF, whoops, let me get rid of those drawings. If I click on the PDF, I can actually have it pop up in my browser without having to download it and print it. Okay, and so here's the lesson plan for this lesson. Lesson 3 in chapter 4 is models of accelerated motion. Okay, we've got content, learning objectives, materials, which include the materials that are part of the investigation, smart cart, dynamics track, track feet, and an end stop. So each student group would need this equipment. Equipment that's needed for a demonstration. All right, the demonstration is explained here. Some notes regarding the slide presentation that we'll take a look at in a second, and some notes regarding the investigation or the lab activity that students do as part of this lesson. There's some reading assignment information, pages out of the textbook, as well as answers to assessment questions in the slide presentation that we'll take a look at in just a second, and then some information regarding the meat and potatoes of the lesson, like vocabulary, what standards are met, what are some of the fundamental equations in there, and also a key to some of the differentiated learning icons that we see up here in the top of the lesson plan. So our slide presentation is just that. It's a slide deck that you can use to help teach the content of this lesson. It's very thorough. It includes all of the information that you find on the textbook pages, as well as information that applies specifically, where is it? That applies specifically to, there it is, the lab investigation. So not only can you use the slide set to help teach the concepts that are in this lesson, but also some of the ideas and some of the tricky things regarding equipment and stuff like that found in the lab investigation that's part of that lesson. Okay, like how do I connect my smart cart? Right, there's information in the slide set that helps you show students how to connect your smart cart. What should sample data look like? How do I determine, when the cart was moving? Okay, this is available in an editable PDF format. And then there's the student handout. Okay, and in this case, the student handout in this lesson is a lab activity, investigation 4B. So you would print this out, hand it to your students, they would fill in the document, and then submit it for a grade. Along with that, we have an answer key. You'll see here we've got sample data and then sample responses to questions. Those are underlined. Yeah. And then last but not least, there's a video resource here that helps explain how does a person determine an object's displacement given the object, how to do the lab activity. Okay. All right, so we've got about 10 minutes left. Let's see if I can quickly go through some of this information regarding investigations. So I mentioned it earlier. There are several flavors of investigations. There's some that use lab equipment and hardware, but don't collect data, or excuse me, they don't use electronic data collection. There's some that use labware and hardware and use electronic data collection like the smart cart. And then there's some that use just simulations, right? And in this case, this is one that uses data collection, electronic data collection using the smart cart here. And now it's important to note that students in this flavor of lab are asked to open up an experiment file within SparkView software. So those labs that use electronic data collection use SparkView software. And generally one of the first few steps of the handout tells them, hey, open up this experiment file that goes with this lab investigation. Well, all of the experiment files that students are asked to open are found within the SparkView application. So if SparkView is installed on your student computers, all of the files they need are there. Okay, let me open up SparkView real fast. So in this case, it says open the 4B models accelerated motion experiment file. I launch SparkView, it looks just like this. And if I click on this experiments button right here, you'll see here that there's an essential chemistry and essential physics button. If I go to essential physics, there's the file I'm looking for right there, 4B models of accelerated motion. These files are built in to the software. So if you install the software, you have all of these files already configured on the machine. And so now all students need to do is connect their device through Bluetooth. In this case, it's the smart cart. I have a smart cart right here. And then they're ready to collect data. That's it. So they'll follow the instructions here in their handout, and then they'll collect data here in SparkView. And I just have a smart cart in front of me that I'm rolling around on the desk. And that's true for all of the lab activities that use that electronic data collection. Okay, so another flavor of lab we saw in chapter 6 was one that uses simulations. Okay, and this one was vector navigation here. And if I go to the investigation 6A vector navigation here in chapter 6, you'll see here that I also have a handout that I can give to students. But in this handout, rather than opening up an experiment file in SparkView, they're asked to use the electronic simulation that's in the ebook. And so they would use this electronic simulation found right here. See where it says interactive simulation? Students will click this, it'll open up that interactive simulation, and students can type in their values right here in the simulation, answering the questions in their handout, and collecting their data this way.
Somebody asked if it's working with Capstone.
Oh, there was a question, is this working with Capstone? So the answer is yes, all of this works with Capstone. However, none of these pre-configured files, like we saw in SparkView, the ones that are loaded in there already, are there for Capstone yet. So the functionality is all there, but the files aren't there, basically. Okay, so one other one that I wanted to show you real fast was one in chapter 21. Okay, one of my favorite investigations is creating real and virtual image. Oops, nope, not this one. Image formation for a convex lens. This interactive simulation is a lot of fun. Students can use this simulation to help draw ray diagrams to identify where images are formed and what the magnification is, if any, of those images. Oops, I was a little off there. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. Okay, so in the last 6 minutes here, I want to talk quickly about the test bank. Okay, so on the home screen here, we skipped over this button, test bank, on the far right in that top row of buttons. What this is a assessment generator that teachers can use to generate assessments and also save assessments, but it's actually a unique tool, and I'll show you how. So if I click on that button, it brings me here. And if I had my access key, my teacher access key, I'd punch it in here and it would give me access to it. I'm just going to click new user. And I'm going to generate assessments for essential physics, but I could do the same for essential chemistry if I was a chemistry teacher. Okay, so what we're looking at here are the 27 chapters in the book, and I can twirl these open and it'll show me the different sections and also how many questions are available in each section. So I can build an assessment using any of those available questions, right? And now you'll see here, Chapter 2, Section 1 says 4 questions available, but if I go up at the top here, there is a question difficulty checkbox, 1, 2, and 3. If I click 2 and 3, you'll notice that now I have 6 instead of 4. It's because there were 2 questions out of those 2 questions out of those 6 that were harder than a 1 chili problem. So I've just given myself access to problems that are anywhere from easy to hard, from a level 1 to a level 3. And all I need to do is tell it how many of each question I want to put in my assessment. So I want 2 from section 1, 2 from section 2, and 2 from section 3. And then I click done, and it builds my assessment for me right here. And these are the 6 questions. So this is from section 2, 3, chapter 2, section 3, chapter 2, section 1, chapter 2, section 1. And I've got 2 from each. And I've got any difficulty level anywhere from 1 to 2. And so if I want to make a harder question, I can click the harder button, and it takes that easy question, replaces it with a harder one with a difficulty level higher. I can move the questions around. I can swap them with a different question. I didn't like this question, so I click swap, and it basically throws that question back in the chapter 2, section 1 question bucket and takes another one out and puts it in its place. I can delete them. I can move them. I can add new questions up here. So if I want to add another one from section 2.3, I click add question, and I've got a new question from 2.3 back into my assessment. Okay, when I'm done, I can click save, and what that does is it saves that assessment. I didn't put my name on here. Let me put my instructor. Let's call it Physics 1, and we'll do, let's say, 3rd period. Okay, and I'll save my assessment. And I've got my assessment right here. Okay, and so when I'm ready to generate tests, I click generate tests. And now I can pick how many versions of the same test I want. And what's so unique about this test bank is that it takes the questions, and rather than, it moves them around, but rather than changing the questions entirely, what it does is it takes the numerical values in the questions and replaces them with new numbers. And now, what's really neat is those numbers don't go outside the constraints of what would be required for the question. So if it was like an acceleration, a planetary acceleration question, you wouldn't have an acceleration of 10 times 10 to the 26 meters per second squared. It knows there's some intelligence built into how it generates these tests, so those numbers don't go outside of what's reasonable. So let's say I want 3 versions of the test. I'm going to call it A, B, test A, test B, and test C. And here are my 3 tests. And so I can preview them right here. I can print them if I want. And from this window, I just go up here and print from my browser. And I can have a test that I hand out to my students. I can look at the solution set, and this is the teacher key version. If I wanted to see how I solve the problems, I can click on full solution and it'll give me worked out solutions to those problems that are in my assessment. Okay, and if I go back to my templates, for every time I save a new assessment, it puts it in here in my templates. And you can actually share these with other teachers using the same account information. So every teacher in the same school will have the same teacher login code, and that will give them all access to the same bank of, a list of test templates here. So you can actually share them within your department if you like. Okay, so that is just about it. We're just about out of time, but before we totally wrap up, I want to open the floor to any questions. Melissa, were there any questions?
There was one about how to access the book offline, and I put the link to the instructions in the chat window, and we covered all the rest of the questions during the session.
Awesome, perfect.
What other questions do people have?
Well, before you guys start leaving, there's one last slide, and it's an important one because we didn't spend a lot of time talking about how do I get access to a trial version of the teacher book and what does the equipment look like. And the best resource for that is that very top link on the left, pasco.com/essentialphysics. If you go to that website, it will list all of the equipment bundles that you could buy that go with the equipment, that go with the textbook, as well as information about who to contact. You'll have to contact your local area rep to get access to a trial version of the teacher book. We don't want this to get in the hands of students, so there's a little bit of legwork that has to be done first, but we have those options available. Just go to that website and you can find the help you need there. And also, please feel free always contact myself, JJ. My email address is plank@pasco.com, and then Melissa is mpitlack@pasco.com. And then, yeah, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook. We regularly post updates, lab ideas, all kinds of fun stuff. And also there's a link here to some of our other live online trainings. Yeah, that question about pricing. Yeah, that's something that you'd want to discuss with your local area rep. Excuse me. I do know that our sales model is by student. So there's a price per book per student, and then the printed book and the electronic or the ebook are different price. But definitely you can go to pasco.com/support to find your local rep, or you can go to pasco.com/essentialphysics, and here I'll show you. .com/essentialphysics. And so here is what it looks like when you go to pasco.com/essentialphysics. And if you want to preview the book, you just give customer service a call. They'll put you in contact with the rep, and they can go over all the information you want. And then if you scroll down, here are the equipment kits that I just mentioned: basic, standard, and comprehensive. Some more information about pieces of the ebook, and then a contact number and email address to get a hold of our sales department. Thank you very much, you guys, for joining us. It's been great. Like I said, the book is so broad. There's so many things that it can do, and we barely touched the interactives. In fact, we only saw, I think it's 4 of 86 simulations. So, take that student code that I gave you, that trial code. It expires at the end of the month, and go through the student book and check it out. If you guys have any questions, please don't ever hesitate to contact me. Thanks. You guys, I appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
And if you have questions about any of your Pasco equipment, your Pasco curriculum, your Pasco software, please hit up my team at support@pasco.com, or you can find our phone number contact under the support link on. And we are former educators, and we are not scary. We are nice. So please give us a call or shoot us an email, and we'd love to help you out.
Thanks, Melissa. Yeah, our support department is great. I love them. They're right next to us. They're in-house, all available to help anybody with any questions they have.